Slavery ended in the spring of 1865, at least on paper. The cannons fell silent, the generals signed their names, and proclamations were read aloud in towns that had lived for generations on forced labor. But freedom did not arrive like a sunrise, it arrived like an unanswered question. In Natchez, Mississippi, the news reached the plantations slowly, carried by riders who spoke without warmth and without apology. When the announcement was finally made, it was read from a piece of paper by men who had lost money, not conscience. They gathered the enslaved people in the yard and told them they were free to leave. No land was offered, no shelter, no food, only permission. Among those standing in silence that day was a woman named Eliza May Harper. She was 63 years old. Her back was permanently bent from decades of field work. Her hands were thick with scar tissue, her fingers stiff and twisted. The sun had darkened her skin beyond its natural color, and her hair, once black, had turned the dull gray of worn rope. She had been enslaved for as long as she could remember, 50 years clearly, more if you counted the years before memory formed. Eliza had been born on a cotton plantation 12 miles outside Natchez. No record of her birth existed. Her mother died shortly after delivering her. Her father was sold south before Eliza learned his face. She grew up among women who worked silently and men who learned early that resistance only shortened life. By the time she was 10, she understood that survival meant obedience, and obedience meant invisibility. She was married at 17 to a man named Jonah. There were no papers, no legal recognition, just a whispered ceremony conducted by an older enslaved man who remembered prayers from childhood. Jonah worked in the stables. He sang when he thought no one could hear. At night, lying on the dirt floor of their cabin, they spoke of impossible things, a door that locked from the inside, a house that belonged to them, children who would never be sold. Eliza gave birth to 4 children. 2 died before the age of 5, taken by sickness and hunger. The other 2 were sold before they reached adolescence. She never saw them again. The pain of that loss did not explode outward. It collapsed inward, becoming something solid and heavy that she carried for the rest of her life. Jonah died in January of 1865. He caught pneumonia after working in the rain for 3 days straight. The overseer said he was too old to justify a doctor. Eliza held him as his breathing grew shallow and wet. His last words were quiet and practical. He told her to live long enough to own something. Then he was gone. 3 months later, the war ended.
When the plantation owner read the proclamation, Eliza did not cry. She felt no joy, no relief. Freedom sounded like a word meant for someone younger, someone stronger, someone with options. Many people left immediately. Others stayed, accepting paid work that paid barely enough to eat. Eliza stayed only long enough to gather herself. Then she walked toward town with nothing but a cloth bundle and Jonah's words in her head. Natchez was not welcoming. White residents watched the newly freed with suspicion and resentment. There were already rumors of laws being drafted to control movement, employment, and behavior. Freedom, Eliza learned quickly, did not mean safety. It meant visibility. She slept where she could, church floors, kitchens, once under a wagon. She worked washing clothes, scrubbing floors, carrying water from the river. She was paid in coins so small they felt like insults, but she saved every one. She tied them into a cloth and hid them beneath her dress. She did not know exactly what she was saving for, only that Jonah had told her to own something, and she intended to obey him. In July, she met a free black carpenter named Isaac Rowe. He had purchased his freedom years before the war, and now repaired wagons and fences around town. One afternoon, while Eliza delivered clean laundry to a boarding house he was repairing, Isaac mentioned a house no one wanted. It stood on Creek Road, 3 miles outside town, abandoned before the war. The owner had died without heirs willing to keep it. The widow had moved north and wanted it sold quickly. The house was in terrible condition, Isaac said. Roof sagging, windows broken, one room locked for reasons no one talked about. Eliza asked the price, $50. At the time, she had 32. So she worked harder. She took every job offered, no matter how degrading or painful. She scrubbed floors until her knees bled. She carried loads meant for younger women. Other freed women noticed. Some helped quietly. A coin slipped into her hand, extra food left behind. No one asked why she was working herself to exhaustion. They understood. By late August, Eliza had $51 and some change. The widow selling the house did not smile when Eliza appeared at her door. She looked surprised, then cautious. She warned Eliza that the house was barely standing and that the land was overgrown. Eliza said she understood. At the courthouse, the clerk delayed the paperwork, reading it twice and then a third time. He asked if the widow was sure. He looked at Eliza as if she were invisible. The widow insisted. The papers were signed. Eliza could not read the deed, but she knew what it meant. For the first time in her life, something belonged to her. She walked to Creek Road the next morning. The house stood crooked, as if tired of standing upright. The porch had partially collapsed. The paint had long since peeled away, leaving gray, weathered wood beneath. The yard was wild with tall grass and weeds. Several windows were broken. One door looked newer than the others. Inside, the house smelled wrong, not just of mold and rot, but of something human. Eliza moved slowly, testing the floor with each step. 4 rooms, a fireplace still intact, debris everywhere. She could fix this, she thought. She had survived worse. Then she noticed that every door stood open. Every door except one, at the back of the house, locked. She did not open it that day. She slept in the front room for 3 nights, knife under her hand. On the 4th day, she began cleaning. Work calmed her thoughts. As she swept, she noticed something strange. The floorboards leading toward the locked room were cleaner than the rest, as if someone had walked there recently. She knelt and ran her fingers along the wood. There were drag marks, small, repeated. She circled the house and found the boarded window behind the locked room. The ground beneath it was packed hard. No weeds, no grass. Foot traffic. Eliza waited until midday. Light mattered. She wedged the knife into her waistband and pushed the door open with her shoulder. It resisted, not from rot, but from purpose. When it gave way, the sound was dull and final. The room was small, empty. No furniture, no bed. The window was boarded shut from the inside with carefully placed nails. The air was thick, stale with trapped breath. There were no chains. Instead, a metal ring bolt had been sunk deep into the floor. Industrial. Beside it lay a short length of rope, frayed and recently cut. Against the wall stood a bucket, clean and used.
Eliza understood immediately. This was not a place meant for living. It was a place meant for holding. She heard a sound behind her, a breath. A child stood in the doorway, barefoot, thin, hair unevenly cut as if done with a knife. The child lowered her eyes. "I didn't touch nothing," the girl whispered. "I only came back 'cause it was quiet." Eliza felt something inside her collapse. The child's name was Hannah. She was 10, maybe. She did not know her birthday. She told Eliza that the man who owned the house before the war had kept her hidden, not as a servant, not as property that appeared in records, as something unspoken. When the war ended, he told her freedom meant nothing. When he died of fever, she stayed. She survived by staying silent. Eliza cut the rope. She tore the boards from the window and let light into the room for the first time in years. Hannah shielded her eyes. That night, Eliza understood the danger. Owning the house did not protect her, it made her visible. If people discovered what had been hidden there, they would not thank her. They would want the silence back. And silence, Eliza knew, was always enforced with violence. Eliza did not sleep that night. Hannah lay curled on a blanket near the fireplace, her body so still that Eliza rose twice just to make sure the child was breathing. Every sound outside made her tense. A distant dog barking, a wagon wheel on the road, the creak of wood as the house settled into the cooling night air. Eliza understood something clearly now. The danger was no longer inside the locked room. It was outside the walls. Just before dawn, Hannah woke with a soft gasp, as if pulled suddenly from a deep place. She sat up, eyes wide, already apologizing. Eliza reached out and rested a hand on the child's shoulder, firm but gentle. She told her she did not need to apologize for breathing. Hannah stared at her for a long moment, as if trying to understand the words, then slowly lay back down. When the sun rose, Eliza made a decision. She could not keep Hannah hidden in that house, not alone, not without witnesses. If something happened to Eliza, the child would vanish again, and this time there would be no one left to open a door. Eliza had survived 50 years by understanding when silence protected her and when it would kill her. This was the second kind. By mid-morning, she wrapped Hannah in her shawl and walked toward town. They did not take the main road. Eliza chose a longer path, skirting fields and fence lines, staying where she would be seen only if someone was looking very carefully. Hannah walked close, silent, her small hand gripping the edge of the shawl. She did not ask where they were going. She had learned not to ask. The first door Eliza knocked on belonged to Isaac Rowe. When he opened it and saw the child, his face changed immediately. Not surprise, recognition, the kind that comes when something fits into a shape you already feared was there. Eliza told him everything, slowly, without embellishment. Isaac listened without interrupting. When she finished, he closed the door and leaned against it, rubbing his face with both hands. "That house," he said quietly. "Folks used to say it was trouble, but nobody wanted to know why." He looked at Hannah, who stood with her eyes lowered, shoulders tight, ready to disappear if needed. "She can't stay there alone with you," Isaac said. "People notice things now. Freedom made everybody nervous." "I know, that's why I came." Isaac nodded once. "We'll need more people, people who won't talk." They started with those who understood loss. By evening, 4 women knew, all formerly enslaved, all mothers who had buried children or watched them be taken away. None of them asked questions that didn't matter.
They brought food, clean clothes. One brought a basin and gently washed Hannah's hair, speaking softly the entire time so the child would not think the silence meant danger. They decided Hannah would sleep at Isaac's house for a few nights. It was closer to town, less isolated, easier to explain if someone noticed a child. Eliza would continue cleaning the house on Creek Road during the day, as if nothing had changed. But nothing had changed, only on the surface. On the third day, someone came looking. Eliza was scrubbing the front room floor when she heard footsteps on the porch. Not heavy, not rushed, deliberate. She stood slowly, wiped her hands on her skirt, and opened the door. A white man stood there, perhaps in his 40s, dressed neatly but not richly. He did not smile. "You the one bought this place?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "Strange purchase," he said, glancing past her into the house. "Most folks wouldn't touch it." Eliza kept her voice even. "It was cheap." He nodded. "You living alone?" "Yes, sir." His eyes lingered too long on the hallway that led toward the back room. "Well," he said finally, "if you hear anything strange, you let the authorities know. This area's had issues." "What kind of issues?" Eliza asked. He smiled then, thin and humorless. "The kind best forgotten." He left without another word. That night, Isaac came by after dark. He told Eliza that the man was a deputy, loosely appointed, recently empowered under new local ordinances. Men like him, Isaac said, were not interested in justice. They were interested in control. "They won't come asking directly," Isaac warned. "They'll wait, see if you slip." Eliza did not slip. She cleaned the house methodically. She repaired what she could. She left the back room untouched, except to remove what had been used to hold Hannah. She did not cover the marks in the floor. She did not remove the bolt. Some part of her needed it to remain, not for evidence, but for memory. If she was forced to explain herself, she wanted the truth to be visible. Hannah, meanwhile, changed slowly. At Isaac's house, she ate regular meals for the first time in her life. She slept on a mattress. She flinched at sudden movements and loud voices, but she began to speak more, mostly at night. She told Eliza about the rules she had learned, how to breathe quietly, how to hide scraps of food, how to stand still for long periods without moving. She said these things plainly, as if reciting instructions. Eliza listened and said nothing. There were no words that could make such lessons acceptable. 2 weeks passed. Then the law arrived in written form. New notices were posted around Natchez, black codes, though they were not called that aloud. Laws about employment, about vagrancy, about children without guardians. Any black child deemed unattached could be apprenticed to a white household for their own good. Eliza read none of it. She did not need to. Isaac explained it to her carefully. Hannah has no papers, no recorded parents. If someone reports her, they can take her. Eliza felt the old weight settle into her chest again, the same weight she had felt when her own children were sold, the same helpless fury. "She's not unattached," Eliza said. "She's with me." Isaac hesitated. "Legally, that's thin ground." That night, Eliza sat alone in the house on Creek Road, staring at the bolt in the floor. She understood then what the house truly represented. It was not just a place where something terrible had happened. It was proof of how easily people disappeared when the law decided not to see them. If Hannah vanished again, it would be lawful. That was worse than slavery, because slavery, at least, had named its victims. Eliza made another decision. She went to see Reverend Samuel,
a man who learned to read in secret during slavery and now led gatherings of freed people in a converted workshop. She told him everything. He listened, then closed his eyes for a long moment. "There are men who will say this child is better off apprenticed," he said quietly. "They will use the law like a blade." "I know," Eliza said. "That's why I won't let them." Reverend Samuel nodded. "Then we need witnesses, not just us, people with paper." Within days, word reached a representative of the Freedmen's Bureau stationed nearby. A young man from Ohio, recently arrived, idealistic and overwhelmed. He agreed to visit the house. When he saw the back room, the bolt, the boards, the marks on the floor, he said nothing for a long time. Then he took out a notebook and began to write. "This shouldn't exist," he said. "But it does," Eliza replied. The man looked at her. "You understand what you're doing. This will make enemies." Eliza nodded. "I already had them." The visit was not unnoticed. 2 nights later, someone threw a stone through the front window of the house on Creek Road. No message, no words, just the sound of glass shattering in the dark.
Eliza did not repair the window immediately. She left it broken as a sign that she was still there. Hannah moved back into the house shortly after, despite Isaac's protests. Eliza refused to let the child live in hiding again. They slept in the front room together. Eliza taught Hannah small, ordinary things: how to sweep, how to cook cornbread, how to hum quietly while working. Hannah learned quickly. She smiled more. Sometimes she laughed, then looked startled by the sound of it, as if laughter were a mistake. One afternoon, Hannah asked a question she had never asked before. "Am I yours?" she said. Eliza did not answer immediately. She thought of papers, laws, men with authority. Then she thought of Jonah's words. "Yes," she said finally, "you are." Hannah nodded once, as if confirming something she had already decided. The trouble did not end. It never does. There were whispers, stares, a visit from the sheriff that ended without confrontation, but with clear warning. There were nights when Eliza slept lightly, knife close, listening for footsteps. But the house did not become silent again. It filled with ordinary sounds: cooking, talking, a child moving freely from room to room. The back room remained empty, its door open, light reaching places it never had before. Years later, people would pass the house on Creek Road and say it felt different. Not haunted, not cursed, just heavy, as if it remembered something important and refused to let it be forgotten. Eliza lived long enough to see Hannah grow tall and strong, long enough to see her learn letters from Reverend Samuel, long enough to know that whatever danger she had invited by opening that door, it had been worth it. She had bought the house to finally rest. Instead, she had given history something it rarely allowed: a witness. Eliza understood that choosing not to be silent came with a price, and that price did not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrived as absence. The first thing she lost was work. Women who once handed her laundry quietly stopped doing so. Doors that had been opened before were now closed with polite excuses. It was never said aloud, but Eliza felt it clearly. People were afraid of being associated with a house that officials had started noticing, afraid of a woman who had invited attention instead of avoiding it. Food became scarcer. Coins came less often. Hannah noticed before Eliza did. She began offering to eat less. She said she wasn't hungry, even when her stomach made sounds in the night.
Eliza pretended not to see it, then corrected herself. Pretending had never saved anyone. "You eat," Eliza told her. "I've known hunger long enough." Some nights Eliza went to bed hungry instead. The second thing she lost was anonymity. Men began passing the house more often. Sometimes they stopped, sometimes they did not. Once Eliza found footprints near the back window in the morning, pressed deep into the soft earth. She said nothing about it. She repaired nothing. Silence, when chosen carefully, could still be useful. The Freedmen's Bureau man returned once more, then stopped coming. His letters, Isaac said, went unanswered. Funds were being redirected. Priorities were changing. Reconstruction was already losing its teeth. One evening, Reverend Samuel came to the house and sat heavily at the table. "They're tightening things," he said, "not with whips, with paper." A new ordinance was circulating. Children needed guardianship records. Informal arrangements would no longer be tolerated. Apprenticeship claims were increasing, legal on paper, irreversible once signed. Hannah sat very still, listening. Eliza felt the old terror rise again, sharp and familiar. That night she took the deed from its hiding place beneath the floorboard and held it in her hands for a long time. Owning property had been her shield. Now she wondered how thin that shield truly was. She made another decision, not a loud one, a careful one. She went to the courthouse the next week with Isaac as a witness. She stood in line among people who pretended not to see her. When she reached the clerk, she stated her request calmly. She wanted guardianship.
One night, Hannah asked a question that cut deeper than any threat. "If they take me," she said quietly, "will you still be here?" Eliza answered without hesitation, "Yes." "But will I be allowed to come back?" Eliza did not answer immediately. She chose the truth. "I don't know," she said. Hannah nodded. She had lived with uncertainty long enough to recognize honesty when she heard it. The knock came late one evening, firm and official. Eliza knew before she opened the door that this was not a warning. It was a decision. Two men stood outside. One carried papers. They spoke politely. They said the law required review. They said the child's status was unresolved. They said temporary relocation was in her best interest. Eliza did not argue. She asked for time. One night. That surprised them. They granted it. That night, Eliza packed Hannah's few belongings carefully, not because she intended to let her go, but because dignity mattered, even when everything else was uncertain. Before dawn, Eliza took Hannah to the back room, the room that had started everything. Sunlight filtered through the open window now. Dust motes floated gently in the air. The bolt still sat in the floor. "This room tried to erase you," Eliza said softly, "but it failed." She pressed the deed into Hannah's hands. "This house is proof," she continued, "not just of what was done to you, but of what you survived." Hannah clutched the paper, even though she could not yet read it fully. "They can take me," Hannah said, voice steady, "but they can't make me forget." Eliza smiled then, not with joy, with resolve. When the men returned, Hannah went with them. Eliza stood in the doorway and watched until the road swallowed them. The house was quiet again, but it was not empty. In the months that followed, Eliza told the story whenever it was safe to do so. To preachers, to teachers, to anyone who would listen and write it down. She showed them the room, the bolt, the marks. She refused to let it be smoothed over.
Hannah was moved twice, then 3 times, apprenticed, reassigned, displaced. But she did not disappear, because her name existed now, because her story existed, because Eliza had chosen memory over safety. Years later, when Eliza's hands were too stiff to work and her sight began to fade, the house on Creek Road still stood, worn, patched, unremarkable to anyone who didn't know. People said she had been foolish, that she could have lived quietly, that she had invited hardship. Eliza accepted that judgment. She had lived quietly for 50 years already. When she died, there was no monument, no headline. But the house remained. And somewhere, a woman who had once been hidden behind a locked door remembered the name Eliza May Harper and told her children the truth. That freedom did not begin with laws. It began when someone refused to look away.